So I'm going to place it around my head. Once I get what feels pretty comfortable, I want to mark it. And I'm going to need to mark it here and here on both sides. Do you ever have extra thread laying around from previous projects, but you don't know what to do with it because it's definitely not enough to quilt a whole nother project? Well, that happened to me recently while I was going through my bin of extra finesse thread when I noticed these two sitting together. And I thought they looked really great together. I decided to do a beret, very much inspired by the French blue name and the color. I decided that Spring Fling was just going to be a really fun accent color for some of the quilting that I was going to do. So I took these two to the quilt store and went to find some fabric for the beret. Some of the fabric that I found at the quilt store was this blue and white flowers, which I really loved. It would not only look great with both the French blue and the Spring Fling, but would look fabulous as the top of the beret. But I also really liked this gray blue one with the hearts, so I was torn. So I decided to get it and make it as the lining of my beret. I also really wanted to make the beret two-toned, so I wanted a lighter fabric to be the underparts of the beret as well as around the band so that we could really see the Spring Fling. And I found this one with the dots first, but then I found this one, and what screams France more than the Eiffel Tower and this, so I just thought this was really going to elevate the look of the one that I'm going to show you how to make today. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to need a flexible measuring tape. You're basically going to measure around the circumference of your head so that you're about a ½ inch or so off of your ear, because you don't want it to sit and push your ear down and be uncomfortable. And from that, you're going to be able to calculate your diameter. Once you have that, we have to think about the overhang that we want for a beret. Now, the standard from the research that I did is somewhere between 10 to 12 inches for adults. You're going to take that diameter that you just calculated and decide between 3 to 6 inches of extra that you're going to want for the overhang. Now, I'm going to need to cut some pieces and quilt them since this is a quilted beret, and so we're going to determine the width of fabric. We're going to add 4, and we can cut squares from this from our main fabric. The rest of it we'll cover when we start actually putting the beret together. So let's get to the cutting station so we can start making. We're going to start with quilting our main pieces first. For that, you're going to need to cut your main top piece, your main bottom piece. If you're doing the 2 square versions, then you're going to cut 2 pieces of your backing fabric. That would go the same for the batting if you're doing what I'm doing, the 2 separate squares. So I'm just going to show you putting one together. You're going to start by putting your backing so that the wrong side is facing up. You're going to place your batting on top, and then you're going to place your main fabric on top, smoothing out all of the layers. And baste as you desire. I'm going to start with a little bit of basic pin basting, and then I'm going to do a little bit of sew basting. All right, so let's head over to the machine and let's start quilting. I have my quilt sandwich ready to start quilting. I decided, again, since the Spring Fling has the multicolors, I really want it to be the showcase at the top of the quilt, and we are doing the French blue underneath for the backing. Since I am doing push quilting, I do like to do a little sew basting first. So I am going to sew baste down the 2 sides a little bit, and I'm just going to want kind of a big stitch for this. And it's going to be something I'm going to pull out. And this allows me to take out all of my pins so I can just worry about pushing my quilt around. I'm going to set the size stitch that I want for my actual quilting, and since I only sew basted the 2 sides, I'm going to start in the corner where they meet so I can smooth things out as I go. It's not really going to matter how perfect the design is, it's just really to hold the layers together. So let's do some really tight quilting on this. I think a good meandering design is your best option. All right, so let's take a look at the final pieces. For my main pieces on the top parts, I really wanted to highlight the spring fling so that I get that multicolor to it. For the top one, I decided to do the little swirly flowers I like doing, really tight together to kind of emphasize the flowery look to the fabric itself. And you can see on the back how well the French blue blends in and how it does turn a little bit more gray on a blue that's a little grayer. And then this is the main piece that's going to be the inside part, close to the top of the hat. And with this one, since it was very Paris, I decided to emphasize that with some French words. So I thought that would be kind of fun. From both of the pieces that we've quilted, we're going to cut a circle based on the overhang diameter. I'm going to use the circle cutter, and I'm just going to place that close to the center. Doesn't have to be perfect. Push it down. There's a pin that's going to lock it in place, and then I push down really hard because I'm going through 3 layers here. Sometimes I'll go ahead and take a second one through when I'm going through all these layers just to be sure. So when I get done, I have a circle, and this is just going to get discarded. So I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to do the same thing with the main piece that's going to be the under part. Be sure to press really hard to get all the way around and all the way through those layers. All right, so that's that piece. Again, this part's getting discarded. All right, so the next part is we need to make this into a donut because we have to have a hole for our head, right? So I want to make sure I get in the center of what I've cut. So I'm going to fold this in half and just finger press really, really well. And then I'm going to fold it again in half the other way. And if you really are having trouble keeping your folds showing up, give it just a press in that corner. And then I am going to put a dot. And that's where I want my pin to go. And so I gotta really get in here, make sure I get my pin right where I want it. And now I'm going to cut out my center circle. If it's off a little bit, it will be okay. You just don't want it largely off because you'll be able to decide what part you want to be your front and your back anyway. So, and again, go a couple of times before you lift to make sure you get through all of your layers. So we have our 2 main pieces for making the main parts of the beret. We're going to set those aside and we're going to start working on the headband. For making the headband, you're going to take the circumference and we're going to add 1 inch to that, and we're going to cut it 4.5 inches wide. You're also going to need some iron-on stabilizer like SF101. This you're going to cut the same length as this one, but you're going to cut it about 2 inches. And you're going to need a piece of elastic. The elastic I chose was the 1.5 inch so that it doesn't, hurt, but it holds very well. So you're going to cut this, the circumference, -1, because we do want this to be a little bit tighter than what we end up with here. All right, so we're going to make the headband, and we're going to start with that larger piece that we cut, and we're going to fold it in half with the wrong sides together, just to create a center line. Then we're going to open that up, and we are going to take our fusible SF101 and we're going to place it on one of the sides. It doesn't really matter, so that it's up against that folded line. So it's going to give you about 1/4 inch or so, depending on how straight you cut it. And we're going to press that down to adhere. Make sure your bumpy side is against your fabric or it's going to stick to your iron. And once I get that ironed on really well, I want to put my right sides together, and I can iron or I could clip it. Since the iron's right here, I'm just going to iron it so it's evenly in half. And then we're going to sew it together to make a tube. All right, so now we're going to turn this right side out. Now that it's right side out, we're going to take it back to the pressing station, and we're going to place that seam to one side and press it really well.
And ideally, I want that seam to be at the bottom. So this is going to be my right side for this one, and this is going to be the inside. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I am going to add the elastic. So I like to use a couple of pins. This will help me feed it through. So I'll get that started on that side. And then for the other side, I'm gonna clip it with the pin to the edge. So once I get it a little bit further in there so that I don't lose it. And this will give me some control over it once I get things going. So I'm just gonna take this edge here and I'm just gonna pin it near my seam, but not in the seam. And that way, if I do pull, I don't lose it on both sides. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to push that elastic up against that edge where I have the seam. And if it helps to keep it, you can clip it. So I'm gonna start on this end because I'm gonna top stitch. I wanna create basically a tube for this, but I don't wanna sew on the elastic, because if I sew on the elastic, then it's gonna have places where it's stuck to the fabric and it's not gonna want to stretch right. So I wanna be just over that, so it's kind of getting lined up. And then I just pull this so it's out of the way, and I'm just constantly feeling to make sure that I have that elastic over against the edge. And same thing when I get to this end. Now at this point, I usually need to unhook it from the fabric so that I can pull the elastic forward and then finish that up. It's also a good idea to give that more of a headband look to sew 2, 3, or 4 stitches on this side of it. And I have one of those prepared. So now I'm gonna move on to the next step, and I gotta take my hat off for this part. So I have to determine exactly how tight I want my elastic. All right, so I'm going to place it around my head, and you're just gonna pull until it gathers a little bit, and you're gonna lose a 1/2 inch here because this is where your seam allowance is going to be. But I wanna get kind of a good pucker. Once I get what feels pretty comfortable, I wanna mark it. So I'm gonna hold it with my fingers. I can kind of see how that is, and I'm gonna need to mark it here and here on both sides. Something a little erasable is fine. Now I'm eyeballing it on this side since I had to let it go. And I'm gonna hold that with both of my fingers and just check my marks. And I think that's gonna be good. And I'm gonna sew this tube together. And those marks that I just did, I'm going to make sure that I am pulled out on both sides of this so that when I sew my seam allowance, I will have that tightness that I want for the elasticity. All right, so make sure your right sides are together. Hold of that elastic. Pull so that those marks that you made are visible. And now I'm gonna finish the seam allowance. And I'm going to backstitch that, especially over that elastic. All right, so that's done. My elastic is secure. I can take off my pins, cut off the excess elastic, and now I just want to finish this edge. Now, if you have a serger or an overstitcher at home, then this is a good place that you could do that. I don't have that, so I am just going to open up my seam and iron it down really well. So I do want it open, and I'm just gonna add some stitches on both sides. I'm just gonna do a quick sew on both edges just to hold this down. All right, so now we're ready to attach our band to our inside, or that top part like this. And so remember that your elastic side is going to be the side that sits the lowest. So we're going to attach the opposite side. So I turned this so that my right side is facing out. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to mark the 4 points that are going to help me line this up. So I'm going to fold this in half, and I'm going to put a little marking. I'll do it on both sides just in case, in those corners of those folds. Now we're going to match those up to fold it in half the other way, and we're going to mark again. We're going to do the same thing to our donut. We're going to fold in half, and on the inside circle, we want to give it a marking where that fold is. Make that a little bit better. Now I'm going to match those up and mark again on those folds. Okay, so decide where you want your back to be to where you made the other markings. It's really up to you. Again, I want my right sides together, so I'm going to line up that marking that I made there with that marking here. And you could pin or clip. Sometimes pinning's a little bit better, just depends on what you're comfortable with. Then I like to go across to the other side, or match those up and clip them. Then we'll do the other sides. So those are your main 4 points, and then you can just turn this and as needed, kind of stretch that out and add additional clips. You might have a couple of places where you're going to want to dart, and just let the fabric naturally kind of show you where those are when you get to sewing. All right, so now we're going to sew our seam allowance. We want to do less than 1/4 of an inch, so somewhere between a scant and an 1/8. I like to start where or near that back seam. Okay, now that we have the band attached, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add our bias binding. In the instructions, I show you how to make the bias binding, but here I've pre-made it. And I'm just going to clip it on to start. Remember, it is a little stretchy. You want it pretty good on here, like you were going to sew it to do the next part that we're gonna do. So make sure you've got it pretty snug. So I just have this little snippet here, but I am basically going to use this wide edge so I know exactly how much overlap that I want, which would be 2 1/4. And I'll use this little clip, and I'm going to put a little mark on the one that's pinned down or clipped down, and then I'm going to align the other piece so it's at that area as well, and I'm going to put a little line, and that's going to be my cut line. And now we're going to take it all off. So we're going to open this back up, and it's sometimes helpful to iron this back flat again, just so you don't have to fight with it as much. We'll do that on both ends. All right, and if it helps for you to have it on here, sometimes I find if I have it like partially on, it'll just kind of help me line this up right when I think about how I need to twist these pieces. So this is going to fold like this. This would come over this way. So I want to put my right sides together so that these parts line up. And I'm going to sew a diagonal. So when I get done, it's all one piece. And then we're going to sew on that line. Check to make sure that we've made our tube. And we can see it's going to do what I want it to do. So now I'm just going to grab my ruler. I'm going to cut off the excess 1/4 of an inch from my sewn line. Take it back to the pressing mat, open up that seam and press it. And then we just want to get all of our folds back in that we've lost in kind of our manipulation. Ow. Now we can put it back on and sew it on. When you sew on your bias binding, you want to sew on the actual binding so that you catch both sides, and I'd say about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the part of the binding that you can see. And just as you're going, just make sure that your binding is up against the rough edge on this side. Now we're going to attach this to the top. So we're going to want to do right sides together, clip it in place, and then we're going to sew and bind. Sew a scant 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to bind this one exactly the way I just showed you how to do the other one. So I'm going to finish this up and I'll show you the final project. All right, so now that I have all the binding done, I'm just flipping it right side out, and I'm just going to press out that seam with my fingers, and then our beret is ready to wear.
So there we go. As a reminder, you'll also find below this video a link to the pattern and how to make your very own fitted beret with whatever materials that you want to use.